Hello and welcome to Ideas with Diana on this January 18th, 2022. Um, One thing I was thinking about for today's show is basically um, something to talk about something being part Irish, tongue in cheek or ironic style. I mean, sometimes I think in society, especially on college campuses, the students are way too stolid, way too stoic as the professors want them to be. Oh, we got to concentrate on wokeness. We got to concentrate on PC. You know, being that stoic and stolid and other things is it's like most people think someone has indigestion. They recommend that they take Pepto Bismol. I mean, when I went to college, I went to a college that's built in 1968, UW Parkside. It was at the height of the Vietnam era. I'll say Vietnam Gulf and Tonkin Resolution, as I know friends who served in Vietnam. And I agree with them that it was not a war, it was a Gulf and Tonkin Resolution, although it was fought as a war. But when we built Parkside, we did something different than what happened at Madison when Madison imploded in 64 and 68. At Parkside, we allowed all points of view, whether disruptive or uncomfortable or not. But the point was you could not physically hurt someone, and you could not physically go, punch or basically go, oh, did you hear what this person said? Did you hear Nope, that wasn't allowed. You could say, well, look, I understand your point of view, but I think you have a good philosophy, but it's at the wrong time. Okay, and and also as a campus of where many of us who are Republicans and Democrats blended. In those days, we didn't use the word purple because we didn't think, as a country, we had to subdivide ourselves so much. We're all Americans, and we just realized that as Americans, we're going to have different points of view, and also being a member of the Republican Party doesn't mean that you have horns on your head and you have a goat face and you have hoofed feet and everything else that's made out today by traditional media. I don't want to use a certain word, but basically, I do think sometimes it's biased. That's why I counterbalance my news gathering by reading magazines as National Review, Atlantic, the Washington Inquirer, just and basically conservative magazines. And sometimes I even shut off the quote liberal news, and the not fake media, but I do think it's way too much over here and not enough over here. And I don't like this pitting where you pit people together like this, because that doesn't solve anything either. Because then, as I mentioned in previous broadcasts, it's like a Roman Coliseum. Essentially whoever is the better fighting wins. But I would like to get to a concept that I do think is important, though. With this COVID pandemic, we are losing this COVID pandemic big time, super big time. We have all this medical technology that was developed and updated since the 80s. We have a method to do automated mRNA transcription and what was the term I'm looking for? Faster circular bacteria formation of plasmids, faster plasmid formation to basically make medicines and everything else. But what are we doing? We're stuck. We have the talking heads and with their great communication tugs and mealy mouth speech saying, well, we didn't know about we didn't think we needed these types of special masks when we first started, or there weren't too many of those, so we made a decision. Well, if you made a decision that the masks wouldn't last apart, why did you say that in the very beginning? Also, as I've been saying, posting on Facebook, basically is this. Some people think, well, okay, no, I'm wearing a mask. Yeah, I'm covered. I'm covered. I got this mask on. Well, as you can see from my fingers, there's plenty of holes for the COVID to drive through. Actually, COVID could drive many Mack trucks through this. And finally, people are starting to understand this because basically they say, well, all right, if you have a mask that has a pore, I'm trying to do it this big, and let's say this is the COVID guy. Wow. Even with 10 cans of beer, he could drive through here. I mean, come on now. What are you thinking? And even when they did test basically certain masks, only reduced the effect of getting COVID for a maximum of 20 minutes or something. And finally, as is mentioned in Megyn Kelly's show, which I'm glad she did, she had experts that mentioned this. Even though you have the COVID shot, the first shot, second shot, booster, and the booster I received on Monday because I was finally eligible to get it in Wisconsin. And I'm Republican, and I believe in the shots and the boosters. But I'm wise enough to know that the shots and the boosters are not a wall. They do not stop COVID. What they do is if you do get COVID, they reduce the impact. So basically, instead of having to go to intensive care, you may have a cough, you may have something like a flu for a few days, but you're not going to be at the point where basically you may have to go to intensive care. Well, with that being said, based on current technology that we have, and especially that I know from working in the 80s throughout the 90s and even in the early 2000s, we should have had this beat by now, really. I mean, we have flow cytometry. Now, some people say, oh, well, we got PCR to test and we got Western blot to test. Big wow. Let me tell you about PCR and Western blot. When I first started in medical research in the 80s, there's a good friend of mine. His sister was my executive assistant, and we would talk. And he taught microanatomy at a medical college, and we'd talk about this. And he'd say, well, my thesis advisor says, this Western blotted PCR is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Yes, in the 1960s, it was the greatest things, but this was the late 1980s. And I said, you got to open your mind. You got to say, well, I did. I opened my mind. I like algometry. Well, finally, you're up to 1971. What about flow cytometry? Trust this newfangled flow cytometry, having a computer. Now, this was someone who was my age in the late 20s, talking like their grandparents or something like this, and it's like, oh my God. And even his sister would say, please, could you just stop drinking the funny water and think like a human being for once on your own thoughts rather than this scientific funny water that they're giving you, just closing your mind. So we would talk, and one thing I did was what happened was, like, he used to say, well, I don't trust it. This is a new science. So what happened was I called a friend of mine, and I actually contributed to this book that was published in 1990, Flow Cytometry, by Zbigniew Darshikevich. He was head of oncology at Sloan Kettering Hospital in New York City, or New York, as many people like to say. And at being fellow Polish, we talked about different things, and we also saw things from a different perspective. And just to give you an example, as you can see in the cover here, you'll see it says New York Medical College, Valhalla, New York. 50 chapters with DNA content, immunofluorescence, anti-tumor drug intake, cell viability, intercellular pH, calcium-2 content, transmembrane potential, procedures for plant protoplasts, and phytoplankton. Quite a bit of stuff. And let me just show you. Let's see if you could, but you can see basically when you read through here, like control standards and histogram interpretation in DNA flow cytometry. Okay, well, let's talk about DNA flow cytometry. Very important graph, the cell cycle. I and a colleague, Suichi Oshima, did our DNA's projects in flow cytometry, and actually we worked on a better way to get a higher sorting sample recovery, and we shared it with the Human Genome Project, which allowed the Human Genome Project to finally complete its task of sequencing the human genome, because before the sort rates were so low that there was more garbage than product, and we actually were able to get the rates up to 95%. And again, cell cycle, Suishi was a master of this. He's a good friend. Um, and let's see. Okay, let's do it. Let's see. I saw a good graph. Thought I saw a good graph here. There we go. Proliferation of basically DNA content. Now, why is this is again using flow cytometry, showing two scanning mode, two data acquisition modes, using what's called a dot plot. Why is this important? Because basically, um, PCR, Western blot, and even abergometry. Wow. Again, if you want to go back to working in the 60s and early 70s, fine. It's up to you. Some people like doing things the old way, and they refuse to use new ways when they come. But the thing is, if we we're going to understand this COVID, this is some of the things we have to do. But there are other things we need to do too. Like one thing is basically that came up in discussion when I worked as a medical researcher coming into the 90s was the term of apoptosis and self non-self. Well, let's start with self non-self because that's what helped us basically mitigate the AIDS crisis. In the AIDS crisis, first what happened was we didn't know what the AIDS virus looked like. So that basically this is where this thing about the Western blot and the ice fracture that was used, to discover that AIDS is a pucker ball the same as COVID, like this. It looks like a soccer ball, but it has little pimples that stick out all around it, like that. So it's like a soccer ball with a little pucker like this and this all around it. And what happened was we discovered it is derived from the herpes simplex virus, and later described as a research virus that got out of hand and got away. Well, even knowing that, what happened was first thing we were able to develop an antibody test. Well, now let's say, okay, people may wonder, you hear this thing on news is, you have these home kits with the antibodies, you put the swab up your nose and you put the swab into a container and okay, well, how does an antibody test actually work? And this is something in the media I don't think should be explained more. Well, okay, consider this a cell that has COVID. Okay, so this is the spike protein, like this is the spike protein on COVID. Okay, now when you do the antibody test, I'm going to just imagine that the cell's still underneath there. So this is the spike. So when you do the antibody test, you put in there, there's a chemical antibody that comes in there, goes in there, searches. And when it does find a COVID thing, it goes like this, binds right on this COVID thing, spike protein. Well, then when it binds on the spike protein, what happens, this antibody test also has a flag. And this flag basically interacts with a solution that gives a positive sign or negative sign that you had COVID because the chemical reaction will activate one or two chambers due to this flag that's hooked onto the antibody. But if you don't have COVID, what's going to happen is you may have a cell with some other spike, and this COVID thing will just go around and around. But if you do have cells that have COVID, it'll go like this, bind on, then the flag will bind on to something else, which will activate the chamber that tells you whether you're positive. Now, the thing about this is with antibodies, though, antibodies are not 100% effective because basically, here's part of the reason why. Because the cell membrane is fluid. It's not the cell membrane is not like a solid. A membrane's like this. This is a plant. A plant membrane is made of sugars and fibrous. It's very solid. It's very hard to destroy. That's why when you try to cut a plant or something, it's a lot of work to cut a plant. Our membranes are like. So what happens? So the other thing is that with our membranes are very plastid. So we can have our cells, put other antigens out as needed. Like for example, if we need extra sugar from our body will put out some things that grab more sugar. But what they may do is they may block other receptors. So that's why basically if you do an antibody test, I would recommend that you do it twice because it's not completely 100%. So do it twice so that you have a complete control. So if it's positive twice, you got COVID. If it's negative twice, you don't have COVID. Now, if it's positive and negative, then you should do a third one to see which one comes out, which of the two come out, either positive or negative. The second point about this is in COVID, they claim this new Omicron variant can control what's called self and non-self. And self and non-self is what we learned about controlling in the beginning of the AIDS crisis. Self and non-self is this. I'll use the phone in the town about self and non-self. Okay, what happens? Visually, you can see these two things are different, like that. Okay, so now in the cell, you have multiple cell types. You have some cells which are basically platelets, which are small cells like this. You have some cells that are endothelial cells, which is what COVID is, and also AIDS is basically. And so when they float around the body, basically they float around, and basically the body recognizes, hey guys, you're part of the club. Yeah, just do your thing. We'll let you go, and I'm not gonna bother you. But let's say you have a cell that's an infection that's not part of the club like this. So you go, okay, here comes the bouncer. Hey, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here. Well, I would like to be here. No, you're not. Okay, you're not going to go. So the bouncer calls another bouncer, which is a white blood cell, and the white blood cell takes it to a different place and eventually gets the cell out of the body or completely destroys it by natural killer cells. Now, the thing about Omicron with self and non-self is simply this. Omicron, like AIDS, can control self and non-self. So what does this mean? So you got this low cell coming out, this low COVID cell in the body is going through bloodstreams, and I was thinking, hey, hi. And when really and even the bouncer's like, oh, hi, Joe. And what happens, the guy goes, well, how do I know this cell? Basically, it's like, oh, okay, hi, Joe. It's like being admitted into a club when someone's 16 and uses a false ID. Basically, so this COVID cell goes through and can bind in and do its stuff. And this is turning off of non-self. Now, when self is turned on, he tries to come through like a 6-year-old going into a 20-year-old club with a fake ID. Hey, you're 16. You're not supposed to be here. What? I'm old enough. No, you're not. No, you're not part of the club. I'm not going to go. Okay, John, come on over. So the old white blood cell comes over, takes this COVID out and gets rid of it. But when non-self is turned off, oh, your ID looks good, even though it says the person's 16. The person lets them through anyway, even though it's a 21. It's a club that requires someone to be 21 years older, and that's how self and non-self works. And that's why what I'm surprised about is that since we understand self and non-self, we understand about antibody expression, antibody mapping, and other things. Why are we taking so long to solve this? Why haven't we? And one thing I was thinking about is last night, sometimes I like to watch the BBC, and one program I watched was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And it showed like one thing about news commentating. He goes, well, to those of you in the other galaxies that haven't quite moved forward yet, guys, bang the rocks together. Bang the rocks together. You'll get started and start moving ahead. And that's what we really need to do. We really do need to bang the rocks together because we're really missing a lot of things. And the problem with this COVID lockdown too is simply this. Again, another textbook, Human Development. And let's see, what's the chapter I'm looking for here? Let's see. So, social cultural forces, 371. So let's go to page 371 here. And what happens, some of the social factors that come, Mary, just, I'll leave it. Social, gender, and economic, ethnic issues in health. Social factors. The two most important social factors on health are social economic status and education. In the United States, income level is a major determinant of how healthy a person is likely to be, mainly because of income is linked to having access to adequate health care. Regardless of an ethnic group, people who live in poverty are more likely to be in poor health. Related to income is education. College graduates are less likely to develop chronic diseases such as hypertension and cardiovascular disease than people who do not go to college. In fact, people with less education and not only more likely to contact the they're also more likely to die from it. In one of the largest studies ever conducted, results show the representative sample of 5,600 working adults between 1864 educational level was a social good health. Gender. Are men or women healthier? The question is difficult to answer primarily because women are not routinely included in many health studies in the US until the 1990s, a very important point. However, there are several clear gender differences. Women live longer than men on average for reasons described earlier, and young adult males are more likely to die from homicide than young adult females. International gender differences are evident in different ways. Women are more susceptible to some conditions, including blindness, whereas men have higher rates of other diseases such as tuberculosis. Incident rates of HIV/AIDS overall roughly equivalent, although rates among women in higher sub-Saharan Africa and Middle East. Ethnic groups. Well, this goes on to say that with ethnic groups, there is a disparity. We are not a common melting pot in the United States nor in the world. But the thing is, with the lockdowns and improper lockdown policies and separation policies, it makes these things worse because the thing is, people need to get out. People need to socialize. People need to meet. Like I go out to a friend with a sports bar, go out to Barnes and Noble for coffee. We go grocery shopping together. And also I have friends that come over and we have a coffee clutch. And this is important for our socialization and health. In addition, we co-watch TV programs or movies, again, for socialization and health. But for those basically in other countries, like our friends in the EU and friends in England, where basically there's been a very strict lockdown and even vaccine passports, and I've seen the protest and also some issues about those who are not following their own rules, as mentioned in the UK news. I'm very disappointed to see that those in the upper class have forgotten their first law of officer command that any order you give someone, you are expected to follow your same order yourself. You can't use rank has its privileges to get out of it. And apparently that's what has happened from what I observed in the UK with some upper members of society who should know better. And this goes back to why people, why people worldwide and even people say, well, I don't trust the government on this vaccine, or I don't trust the government on what they're saying. Well, yes, I can emphasize why they're saying it, because when you have people who deny that they didn't violate their own rules during the COVID lockdown, especially during the serious COVID lockdown, whether in the UK, EU, or United States, there are many other examples. I'm sure they'll be found in the future. What's someone supposed to think when they hear this? That basically someone who is supposed to be more educated than them, higher in class rank than them, can't be trusted. What does that mean? Does that so does that mean, like, okay, well, I'm going to be naive and I'm going to be in Virgin Land and I'm going to trust everything it says, even though it means that basically I'm going to be the one that gets burnt? No, many of us no longer live in Virgin Land. We haven't lived in Virgin Land for a very long time. To some who listen who don't understand what that means, think of it this way. Prior to going to college or prior to entering the real world after graduating from high school, you had this belief that, oh, life is just parties, and we're going to have a party, and there's a football game, and we can trust our teachers and administrators to steer us the right way and tell us how to think and everything else. But then when you get in the real world, you get in college, you get in situations that, well, wait a minute. And it's like, and some people say, well, oh, you should save yourself. You should abstain for, finding the right person. And even Billy Joel wrote a song, The Good Die Young. And there's a close friend of mine that I worked with many years ago, and she was raised very Catholic. And for her, that was her liberation song, because basically she realized that if she would have followed this thing about the strict of saving yourself and the rhythm method and not using contraception or the Plan B pill, she would have not had the future that she wanted. She would have probably been stuck with 8 children and a poor husband that couldn't support them, and very much how to raise them. But now she is able to do a lifestyle where she is a professional woman. She works in the medical field, and she's able to basically, when she does decide to have children, they'll be able to all go to college and be raised properly. Um, but the thing is this. Um, when you get out of Virgin Land, it's like the story Toyland. It's wonderful. It's the toys, but you can never go back again, because you can't go back to being that naive. Say, oh, I got to trust the principal and the teacher. The teacher and the principal always know what's right, and I got and not consume that. Basically, they may have their own agendas and may have their own things why to trying to direct you or manipulate you that way. So in this COVID thing, many people are out of Virgin Land right now. First part COVID, when we were flattening the curve, we were in Virgin Land. Oh, if we just go in and flatten the curve and we're gonna get this thing done, then people found out, well, wait, we did the flatten the curve. COVID's still rising. And then finally what happened at one point, they realized that people need to have sports to get out and get a release, um, to keep psychologically well. But then again, the Virgin Land group came and says, well, we can't have football now. Maybe we can have in January when we get this vaccine out. And that's when a lot of the football players spoke up. They said, well, wait a minute, you people in Virgin Land don't understand. When we play a season, we need those extra months off to recuperate. We can't play 2 football seasons in 1 year. And this people, for instance, oh, we'll just have a short season. Nope, doesn't work that way. We still need that time off. So finally, President Trump basically, what I'm glad he did was basically he did more than bang the rocks together. He probably gave him a good swift kick in the ass, and they said, we're going to have football in the fall. We're going to have basketball in the fall. We're going to find some way how to do this in hockey, and we did it. And that's what helped with a lot of the social health and psychological health, because this COVID is not just about a viral illness. It's about psychological health as well. And for example, what do people mean? What do I mean by psychological health? Well, for some of us, basically, like I have SAD, which is seasonal affective disorder. So I'm affected when we go on daylight savings time. My body is still affected, but not as much as it was. Um, but the other thing is, even if you don't have SAD with this COVID, if you stay inside too much, you may find yourself sleeping till noon, sleeping till 1 o'clock. And you may find yourself sleeping more. And also, you may find yourself eating more. I got into some bad binge eating during lockdown. I'm finally cutting back on it, finally starting to go down. But at one point, my weight was up to 320. Now I'm down to 280, 85. So you got to take care of your emotional, psychological, as well as your physical health. And the problem, what I see is with the talking heads, they're not addressing any of these points. Either it's the liberal media. I find the independent media and the conservative media addressing these points more than the liberal media. And that doesn't mean that I'm biased against the liberal media, but it does mean that basically I do feel that this is something that should be addressed by all points of view of media. And so nowadays, there's some days that I don't watch certain media channels, even though I am a news hound, because basically I know it's like I don't want to keep hearing the same script all the time. Well, according to Dr. Fauci, or according to the, I mean, God, I mean, I could recite it by heart how many times I heard this many times during the day, watching CBSN, watching NewsHour, watching ABC, and when I watch independent news things, basically I hear actually updates, and I actually hear true speaking. I don't hear mealy mouth speaking. I don't hear golden tongue speaking of people who know how to use the communication so well that they could tell a lie to you and you wouldn't even know it. Those are the channels I turn off. I prefer to hear the scientific facts. I'm educated. I worked in the medical field, and also those of you in the public, many of you are educated enough to understand the full scientific discussion. You're not as some media stations think you are, that you're a bunch of dumb farmers or dumb ditch diggers that you don't understand anything. You the back row can understand all this stuff, and that's a reference to one book that came out by one author, as well as those of us in the front row. But you basically you understand when you're being lied to. You understand when you're being manipulated. You understand when someone's talking with the golden tongue trying to deceive you. You know, insist. Insist that they tell you what the truth is. Insist. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be sugar coated. But it's going to help you. It'll help all of us, and we got to work together on this, because if we don't work together on getting what the real truth is about this and stop the sugarcoating, the delusions, the deceit, the manipulations. How many more people have to die? We can solve this, and we can make it that basically we can get back on our lives, that we don't have to be put on a leash about this lockdown and the mask. So insist upon knowing what the full discussion is, and don't take the answer, well, you don't have enough education, you can't understand. Yes, you can understand. You're an adult. You lived on your own for many years. You understand it, and you know how to read. You know where to find books in the library, and also you know how to find books on the internet. And the thing is, just insist, please, because if we keep allowing ourselves to be deluded, manipulated, talked to by golden tongues who are thinking they're telling a lie, and we don't realize they're telling a lie, we're going to have more serious problems with this COVID than you can believe. So to solve this, insist upon full disclosure of the truth, and remember, it's not going to be pleasant. It's not going to be sugar coated. Some of it may be upsetting, but basically, what happens is better to know, so that basically all of us can plan how we can develop a strategy to get back to living normal again. Well, let me know what you think. The best way to reach me is on Twitter at Diana1A. Again, the best way to reach me is on Twitter at Diana1A. I'd like to thank you all for listening, and please keep informed, and seek other forms of information, so that basically you're not being led with blinders on. Well, thanks again for listening, and this has been Ideas with Diana on January 18th, 2022.